Hello, and welcome to Heart Containers, a daily Nintendo podcast where every Monday through Friday we discuss the latest Nintendo news. I'm your host, Rami Fawaz, and this is the episode for Friday, March 8th. Today, we are going to be talking about Kirby's Extra Epic Yarn, how that released yesterday, skeptical rumors about yet another 2D Zelda game arriving this year. Could that be possible? We're going to get into that. Pokemon Go making just a ton of money, and Electronic Arts skipping out on their traditional E3 presentation this year. So let's get right into the daily Nintendo report.
Well, the wait is over. This is Nintendo DS. My body is ready.
We would like to play.
A way to make 3D games a reality. And it's called the Wii U Game Pen.
Nintendo has shared the top 30 most downloaded Switch games in North America for the month of February. Now, just like last month, Fortnite is number one, but there are a couple newcomers in the top numbers. Wargroove, the indie classic, now it's a classic at least, that actually took heavy inspiration from the Advance Wars franchise, is sitting at number 2, with the Final Fantasy IX remake, it's not remake, no, the port, that's what it is, at number 3. Now, the rest of the chart, I mean, there's 30 of them, so I'm not going to go over all of them, but the rest of them are pretty much what you would expect to see every single month. We're talking about games like Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, Minecraft, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and Stardew Valley. But that top 3 is what I really wanted to point out in this first news story. Fortnite being number 1. I guess you should say that it's no surprise that Fortnite continues to be at the top of this list, considering that it is still one of the biggest games, if not the biggest game out there, period, across all platforms. The competition is heating up. I mean, the recent introduction of Apex Legends into the fray, of course, that's not on a Nintendo console, but it's still eating a portion of the market share that Fortnite has owned, has dominated for many months now. But it's still interesting to see that Fortnite is on top and that Nintendo is benefiting from that. There is a really nice relationship between Epic Games and Nintendo going on right now, where many believe that a game like Fortnite would not work very well on the Switch. I mean, I remember very early on when there were tons of conversations about could games like Overwatch work on the Switch? Could games like Rocket League work on the Switch? These competitive online experiences on a console that is handheld and is not guaranteed to have internet connection. Many people doubted that that would be possible, and here we have Fortnite thriving on the Nintendo Switch, and that's really cool to see because it can be often very disheartening to look at maybe like sales for all platforms in a month. You can look at UK sales as an example, like UK sales for the month of January. You look at some of the highest selling games and they're Red Dead Redemption, Kingdom Hearts 3, you're talking about Resident Evil 2, and they take such a large portion of that pie, and Nintendo gets none of it because Nintendo's relationship with third parties has been notoriously rocky for the past few generations. So to see Fortnite act as an exception to that rule, especially considering how big Fortnite is, that's really cool to see. And number 2 and 3 on that list also make me very happy. Wargroove deserves all the success it can get. It really is a truly special game, and Chucklefish kind of took the attitude that, hey, if Nintendo isn't going to give us an Advance Wars game, we are going to give it. And I'm constantly impressed by how they continue to update that game with quality of life fixes and promises that more content is to come. It is a special gem of a strategy game, and it deserves to be number 2. Final Fantasy IX, I don't have much to say about it. I like that it's up there, though. Square Enix bet very high on the Switch this year. There's a ton of Final Fantasy ports coming to the Nintendo Switch in 2019, as well as Dragon Quest XI-S. That's the big marquee Square Enix game that I would probably single out for 2019. So it's nice to see them get rewarded too at being number 3. It's just refreshing that the top 3 releases or the top 3 most downloaded games on the eShop for last month, none of them are Nintendo games. That's pretty surprising because Nintendo typically always dominates the top charts regardless of if they have a new game or not. I mean, if we're going back to the Wii U era, even if Wargroove and Final Fantasy IX released in that era, I would still probably expect to see like Mario Kart 8 and Super Smash Bros. Wii U to still be above those. So it's really refreshing that we're not seeing that, and that other companies, other games, whether they're from indies or third parties, are doing really well on the console. Kirby's Extra Epic Yarn, the 3DS port of the 2010 Wii title, arrived yesterday, marking the end of the schedule for 3DS releases that we are currently aware of. So, as of today, if you check Nintendo's website, no 3DS games are even listed as coming soon for the handheld. So, there are really two parts of this story that I wanted to mention. First of all, yes, Kirby's Extra Epic Yarn has released. I didn't really say that much about it when I announced it just now, because what is there to really say? I'm not all that excited about this game, and it's not just because I'm fully into the Switch's ecosystem now and I'm not really hanging out with my 3DS as much as I used to. Kirby's Epic Yarn, the 2010 game, is a game that I played, and it's also really old, and there are a lot of sequels that I probably would rather go back to than just playing a port of the Wii game on my 3DS, which also doesn't nearly look as cute as the original game did, which was part of the fun. The aesthetic was really nice to look at. It's so crisp, and you want to see how the yarn kind of makes the world, the fabric of that world up, and mess around with it. So I would rather go back to my Wii and play that game so I can get the full effect. But we've had plenty of games since then that kind of fill that gap, in my opinion. We have had the Yoshi's game. Yoshi's Woolly World? Yes, I always mix that up with Yoshi's Crafted World because they have similar names. But we had Yoshi's Woolly World. That game was on the Wii U, I believe, and then it also got ported to the 3DS, and now we also got Kirby Star Allies for the Switch, and Yoshi's Crafted World is coming out later this month. So I have very little motivation to go play Kirby's Extra Epic Yarn. I think the significant part of this news is that Kirby's Extra Epic Yarn was the last game that was slated to release for the 3DS officially by Nintendo. And like I said, if you go to the coming soon section on their website, there's nothing. So could this be the last 3DS first party game from Nintendo? Is that possible? I'm going to say probably not. And the reason why I'm saying that is because Nintendo said earlier in the year when they were talking about their third quarter financial results that they were genuinely surprised that 3DS sales were slowing down at the rate that they were slowing down in. So I read that as Nintendo had extra plans. They had a little bit more juice left in the tank for the 3DS this year. I wouldn't be surprised if they announced something else. Now, what would they announce? Not sure. Probably nothing significant. Like we've seen this year and last year, we're probably going to get another port of some kind, whatever is going to be easiest for them. I was thinking about what ports they could do. There's this current rumor that a Pikmin 3 port is going to come to the Switch. I could see that being a simultaneous release. Maybe Pikmin 3 would work really well on the 3DS. Although, hey, Pikmin came out for the 3DS, and I don't know if I don't know, Pikmin 3 could probably work on the 3DS with that touchscreen. Even though that when they did decide to bring a Pikmin game onto the 3DS, it was in the version of Hey Pikmin, which played completely different than the traditional Pikmin gameplay. So I would expect something like that, or it just gets another Wii/Wii U port brought over, whatever is going to be low effort, because that tends to be the trend, and I wouldn't be surprised if we found out about it later this year. According to Reset Era user VergeBen, Link's Awakening will not be the only Zelda game coming to the Switch later this year. He states that there is another 2D Zelda game currently in development, one that is much smaller in scope and is set to be an eShop only title. He also mentioned that he expects it to be announced in the coming months and will be released before the Awakening remaster. Why am I bringing this up? I'm bringing this up because typically when rumors and leaks like this come out, a lot of people discuss it. A lot of people want to talk about it regardless of the credibility. And I want to make sure that you guys know that I am aware that stories like this happen, but I don't always buy into their credibility. And that's why I don't necessarily like reporting on them as news. And this is kind of an example of that. VergeBen, sure, he has been right about a couple things, but he does not have that stable of credibility, if I'm being honest. I looked at what he said in the past, and this could easily be chalked up to someone guessing, someone just saying, throwing a bunch of stuff on the wall and seeing what sticks, and people saying, oh, well, he's been right sometimes, so maybe we should listen to him and write up news stories about him, because why not? And that also potentially gets clicks, right? And that kind of drives a portion of the industry. This guy is not spotless. This guy I wouldn't put in the same realm as King Zell or even Emily Rogers in that point. There are some people who we should trust and some people who are questionable. Verge Ben is questionable. But I do like this idea that could there be more Zelda games? Like, what does it mean for Zelda? Because Zelda is a franchise that's in a really interesting spot. For a long time, there's been two consoles running side by side, and Zelda games didn't really have to compete with each other in terms of mindshare, in terms of space, because they could really serve two different marketplaces. You could put a Zelda out on the Wii U and the 3DS, or you could put a Zelda out on the DS and the Wii, and they could kind of be separate things. But now that we're putting them both out on the Switch, top-down Zeldas and 3D, full adventure Zeldas, well, it kind of begs the question of what should the cadence be? To me, as a Zelda fan, I would love it if they spaced it out perfectly even so that we never go too long without Zelda. That this from Breath of the Wild in 2017 to the Link's Awakening remake, which should come out this year, has been 2 years, right? So I would imagine that it would be great if 2 years afterward would be when we get a sequel to Breath of the Wild. Then 2 years after that is when we get another top-down game, because that means we're never waiting that long for Zelda. But that also doesn't mean that there's any room for a third Zelda game to really squeeze in there, because it doesn't make a lot of sense. That means we're getting Zelda all the time, or you're almost getting Zelda at a yearly basis, which is another reason why I don't necessarily buy into this specific rumor. Although there is a small caveat here that did jog my memory when I read this. It wasn't that long ago that the Wall Street Journal, a publication, who does have much, much stronger credibility than some guy on Reset Era, was reporting on a Zelda mobile title. And this could very well be something that Verge Ben is talking about, or maybe he's just guessing, but that is something that I wanted to bring back up into the discussion, is that there was a rumored Zelda mobile title. The Wall Street Journal themselves were talking about it. It's really old, too. I think that report might be over a year old at this point, and we've heard nothing about it. That could potentially come out this year. Remember that they try to do 2 to 3 mobile games in each fiscal year. Now, Mario Kart and Dr. Mario World are already announced to come out in this new fiscal year, but keep in mind that Mario Kart was supposed to come out last fiscal year. You might be confused by what I mean by these fiscal years. 2018, the fiscal year that we're currently in, I'm considering last fiscal year. So Mario Kart was actually supposed to come out in the 2018 fiscal year, meaning it was supposed to come out before the end of March. It's no longer doing that. So if they had another game scheduled to come out in the next fiscal year, in the 2019 fiscal year, like Zelda, it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility now that Mario Kart is pushed into it. Does that make sense to you guys? It's very possible that we're getting 3 mobile games next year because Mario Kart is delayed. That's basically what I'm boiling it down to. We could be getting Dr. Mario and Mario Kart and maybe Zelda, because I do buy into what the Wall Street Journal says, even if I don't buy into Verge Ben. Sensor Tower reports that Pokemon Go is making the Pokemon Company a breathtakingly large amount of money. In an article that released on Wednesday, the site noted that mobile gamers worldwide have spent approximately $2.5 billion so far in Pokemon franchise titles. This includes all 6 Pokemon apps that are currently available on the marketplace. Apps like Pokemon Shuffle. I mean, there's a couple other Pokemon games that you can get on your iOS and Android devices that are not just Pokemon Go. But rest assured that the majority is from Pokemon Go, with that app specifically accounting for 98% of all player spending. So that $2.5 billion amount, 98% of that is coming from Pokemon Go. So those 5 other apps really don't matter. They're pretty insignificant when you look at it from that perspective. The article goes on to note that spending in Pokemon franchise titles on mobile surpassed 58 million last month globally, which was about 30% more than their revenue in February 2018. So we're talking about year over year. 99% of that spending, so 57.4 million, was in Pokemon Go. Again, they're making the distinction that although they're talking about all 6 Pokemon apps, it is almost only due to Pokemon Go. This success is coming very, very largely from Pokemon Go. That 58 million number, 99% of that was from Pokemon Go. So let's put these numbers into perspective, because every time you hear numbers, they're very nebulous. It's hard to really get the context of these numbers. Why are these numbers in particular so significant? The reason why they stick out to me is because last week we were talking about a different Sensor Tower report about Dragalia Lost, one of Nintendo's other mobile experiments, one of Nintendo's other mobile games, and how that game had just kind of surpassed Mario Run and Animal Crossing Pocket Camp in terms of its spending. They've both reached this revenue point where Dragalia Lost has actually beaten it. And those numbers, total numbers, were all around the 70 million mark. I believe Dragalia Lost was around 75 million revenue total, since its release. And they talked about Mario Run and Animal Crossing as being around 50 and 60 million total. That means a game like Super Mario Run, which came out years ago, has been persisting for years, has only made about 50 to 60 million in revenue total. And you look at Pokemon Go, it surpassed 57.4 million in the last month. In the last month, it made more than Pokemon Go did, or I'm sorry, made more than Super Mario Run did completely. That's how insane these numbers are. Pokemon Go is unlike anything else. But Nintendo would trade every single mobile app that they have currently on the market for Pokemon Go, and it wouldn't matter. Like, they wouldn't bat an eye for it. That's how enormously successful this app is. But it begs the question, right? Can this be maintained? How long can this go on? People were surprised that Pokemon Go is still a thing in 2018, considering that it's been years on the marketplace. And instead of shrinking, it's actually growing. I mean, the report itself mentioned that what it made last month was 30% more than the revenue in February 2018. Pokemon Go is actually growing. And I think part of that is because they are focused on not only adding new Pokemon and new features and stuff like that, but also improving the quality of life of that game. They are actually making it a lot easier to ingrain that game into your daily life. Things that people were asking for on day one, they're getting a lot better at doing it now. They actually just released a story that I was going to mention, but I didn't think it was going to be big enough, but I'll mention it here, was that they're going to start having lunch events in Pokemon Go. And the reason why they're calling them lunch events is because, I mean, obviously they're having them during lunch. But that is interesting, and that's kind of cool because they're trying to better adapt to the lifestyles of the people who play Pokemon Go. If you go to the Pokemon Go subreddit, you'll see that often there are people that talk about how they want to participate in these weekend community events, but they're busy on the weekend or they can't always do that. So this is Niantic and Pokemon Go responding to that by saying, okay, let's try this. Let's try to have a lunch event. And that's just one example of how Pokemon Go has evolved, pun very much intended, over the past 2 years to really ingrain itself very nicely and easily in the everyday schedule for millions and millions of people. And that's why it is growing so much. Can it continue to do that? I don't know. Eventually, you would imagine that they would run out of Pokemon. Right? Eventually, you would imagine that they kind of run out of content, in which case, what do they do? Do they release a Pokemon Go 2? Like, how do you evolve Pokemon Go? Again, pun intended. I'm not sure. All I know is that Niantic themselves have been investing very, very heavily in AR technology. I don't know how they're going to use that technology specifically to make sure that games like Pokemon Go continue to thrive years and years from now, as well as their new games. I mean, they've been reportedly working on a Harry Potter game for a long, long time, on top of the fact that they've already showed like little teaser trailers for that Harry Potter game, but we haven't seen really anything about the gameplay or know anything about that. So if they want to maintain these behemoth franchises with this AR technology, I'm not sure how they're going to do that, but they're going to have to, because this franchise, Pokemon Go, this game is making them so much money that I don't see it stopping at all in the near future. Third-party publisher Electronic Arts announced today that they would be joining Sony in not having a formal presentation at E3 later this year. Instead, they're choosing to focus on their own pre-E3 event, EA Play. To replace the presentation, they will instead hold multiple live streams throughout the first few days of EA Play, which begins on June 7th, a week before E3. Attendees should expect to get first hands-on with some of their biggest games and other exclusive content during that time. So E3 traditionally, or EA has traditionally had an E3 presentation before the show floor opens alongside, Sony and Nintendo and Microsoft, these guys who've done presentations. But over the years, it's kind of shifted into something new. Nintendo pulled out of doing a live presentation years ago and instead have been doing directs for a while now. Sony announced that they are removing their presentation and really their entire presence from E3 this year for undisclosed reasons. The current rumor is because they are probably going to talk about PS5 sometime this year, maybe around that time, that they're probably going to host their own events and they don't necessarily have to go to E3. They don't have to share that spotlight. So EA is kind of like the next in line when we look at this. EA is now deciding to pull out from their presentation, and instead they're going to just do live streams where they probably are going to announce new things and then have their own little days or, weekend in the spotlight before E3 really happens. This is the week before. So the question that I didn't have answered that I wish I could give you guys is, will they still have games at E3 or are they pulling out completely? I would imagine that they would still have games at E3. They're just not doing a presentation. I think they still have a presence. Again, I will look into it and see if I can get further information about it. This was mostly about whether or not they were going to do the presentation. I would bet that they still do have E3. Why would they do this? E3 is becoming less and less of a for sure thing when it comes to like giving a presentation. I already noted that there is now a history of companies removing the live presentation format, on top of EA not really doing that great of a job when it came to their presentations. Honestly, as a watcher of E3, their presentation has always seemed very formal, very boring, very rehearsed. They kind of talk about things that maybe incite or excite shareholders more so than really the fans. I don't really get a lot of excitement from it. I don't get a lot of value from it. I don't really personally feel like they've done that good of a job with their presentation. So if they want to take their time to maybe pre-record these live streams to make sure that they nail their message, that sounds good to me. Also, it really depends on what they have to show off. As someone who's really big into the Star Wars community, one of the big games that they have to release this year, or that they have to talk about this year as well, is Jedi Fallen Order. That is a huge game for them this year, and hopefully it's going to finally maybe, prove that they know what they're doing with the Star Wars license. There's a lot of pressure on it, but the current rumor is, or the current analysis, current speculation about that game is that they're going to be talking about it at Star Wars Celebration this year, not at E3. It's going to be pushed off, or rather brought forward and be like showed off as a Star Wars property as opposed to a more traditional game property that you could talk about at E3. So some of their biggest games are kind of being pulled away from the spotlight. So they have a few reasons why they would do this. I think it's probably a good idea for them. I mean, they still get the benefit of being part of the whirlwind of E3 because EA Play is just a week before, but they get to manage their own message. They get to, again, pre-record this, make sure they get it right. Maybe it can actually be entertaining this year. And also they might not have a lot of big, huge announcements to talk about because a lot of their big games, I mean, they just released Anthem, they just released Apex Legends, and I just talked about Jedi Fallen Order. Those are three enormous games for 2019. Who knows what they really have left to talk about? I do like this idea. And before we wrap up the show, this is your reminder that Sunday will be March 10th, also known as Mario Day. Nintendo has already started tweeting about the plumber-themed holiday, asking fans what plans they might have to celebrate, which is probably nothing because I don't think people really care that much about Mario Day. I would not expect any major announcements, but possibly like a few in-game events and discounts across their platforms to commemorate this occasion. That's typically what they've done in the past for Mario Day. I guess the real question about this was, could this be significant? Could they talk about something big here? Probably not. Probably not. That's kind of where I'm leaning towards. Although Pokemon Day has really never been that significant either. And this is the first year where they actually decided to say, hey, we're going to have a Pokemon Direct on Pokemon Day. And that's where we learned about Pokemon Sword and Shield. So who knows? They could do absolutely anything. I love the idea that maybe this is when they talk about more Super Mario Party updates, because I've heard about reading around on the Nintendo subreddits that people are seeing Mario Party marketing materials surfacing or resurfacing again in certain places. I think it was mostly in Japan. I can't remember if it was happening in the US, but these stores that sell games obviously are actually bringing out their Mario Kart or their Super Mario Party marketing and putting them back on the shelves to kind of like reinvigorate life into that. And I don't know if that's just coincidence or maybe a sign of something to come. I'm crossing my fingers to hope that that means we're getting DLC, but maybe that's just the optimist in me. Just note that March 10th, this Sunday, is Mario Day, and at the very, very least, expect there to be maybe some discounts. This might be your time to like clean up on some Mario games that you don't own, but you always wanted to own. And that's everything I had for you for this week. We wrapped the week, guys. It is Friday. It is time for the weekend. And if you have any comments, questions, thoughts, opinions, concerns, whatever you want to talk to me about, you can go to the website, heartcontainerspodcast.com, where you can contact me, or you can reach me personally on my Twitter, where my handle is at ROMEFAWAZ. That's at Rome Fawaz. I would love to hear from you guys. This has been Heart Containers for Friday, March 8th. I hope you guys have a fantastic weekend. Thank you so much for joining me today, and make sure you tune back in on Monday for more Nintendo news.